Thursday evening, 7:43, and the chandeliers of Almack's were already sweating. Not literally, of course. But Lady Margaret Standish had always thought the crystals looked like they were perspiring under all that candle heat. Thousands of tiny flames reflected in thousands of tiny facets, and every one of them made the room feel smaller. She stood by the terrace doors, where a thread of cool air snuck past the velvet drapes. Her mother's pearls sat heavy against her collarbone. The string was old. She could feel the weak spot where the silk had worn thin, right at the clasp. 17 years of debutantes had worn these pearls before her. 17 years of curtsies and small talk and pretending champagne didn't taste like wet coins. 17 years, and here she was, doing the same thing. A footman passed with a tray of ices. She didn't take one. Her stomach was too tight. She was looking for someone. She'd told herself she wasn't, but her eyes kept finding the entrance anyway. Mr. Ellis Ashby usually arrived late. He said it was because his tailor couldn't keep time. She suspected it was because he hated these rooms as much as she did. 7:48. A cluster of matriarchs shifted near the column. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of the door. He was there. His collar was crooked. Just slightly. The left side sat a quarter-inch higher than the right. No one else would notice. No one else was looking. But Margaret had spent the last 17 weeks learning the particular geometry of Ellis Ashby. The way his left eyebrow lifted when he was amused. The way his signet ring had a scratch across the crest from a childhood fall. The way his collar always shifted left when he walked through a doorway. She looked away. Fastened her gaze on a potted fern. This had to stop. Tonight. Viscount Hale had sent roses that morning. 12 of them, wrapped in tissue so fine it seemed to float. His letter said he looked forward to Saturday's waltz. Her mother had wept with relief when Margaret didn't tear it up. So tonight, she would find Ashby in whatever alcove he drifted toward, and she would say the word she'd practiced. Asterisk, this cannot continue. I wish you well. Goodbye. Asterisk. Simple. Clean. The kind of cut that healed clean. The champagne table was on the far side of the room. She needed to move. Standing by the doors too long looked desperate. She smoothed her gloves and walked. The carpet muffled her steps. Someone was playing the pianoforte. A Chopin nocturne, the sad one. Margaret's teacher had always said she played it without enough feeling. Maybe she hadn't understood longing yet. She understood it now. She reached the table. Her fingers found the stem of a glass. And then his hand was on her wrist. Not grabbing. Just resting there, like a bird landing on a branch. His thumb pressed gently against the inside of her glove, right where her pulse beat fastest. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. You've been avoiding me, he said quietly. She watched the champagne bubbles rise. Tiny golden beads. I've been busy. You've been afraid. Her throat closed. She didn't answer. He released her wrist. For a moment, she thought he'd accepted it. That he'd walk away and she could finish her champagne and pretend her heart wasn't tearing in two. But then his hand appeared beside hers on the table. Between his fingers, something glinted. The locket. Silver. Oval. No larger than a thumbnail. He'd shown it to her once before, back in April, when the season was new and the hedgerows along Bond Street were just beginning to green. She'd asked what portrait it held. His mother, perhaps. A sister. He'd opened it. Inside was no portrait. Inside was a dried cornflower, its blue petals faded to periwinkle, pressed flat and fragile as butterfly wings. From a common hedgerow. From the lane where they'd first spoken. He'd kept it all these weeks. She'd never known. Now he pressed the locket into her palm. His fingers were cold. Or hers were. She couldn't tell anymore. I don't, she started. Just keep it. His voice was steady, but his thumb still trembled against her glove. Whatever you decide. Just keep it. She closed her fingers. The metal edges pressed into her skin. Around them, the room continued. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell. Lady Jersey swept past in emerald silk, discussing someone's scandalous neckline. No one looked at the woman by the champagne table, holding something she shouldn't, feeling something she couldn't name. Then the music faltered. Not the pianoforte. That continued. But the chatter shifted, dropped an octave. Heads turned toward the entrance. Margaret looked up. The Dowager Viscountess Hale stood in the doorway. Her cane was mahogany with a silver handle shaped like a swan. It struck the marble floor once. Twice. Each impact travelled through the carpet, up through Margaret's slippers, into her spine. 3 times. The Dowager's gaze swept the room. Slow. Methodical. When it reached Margaret, it stopped. Margaret's palm snapped shut. The locket's edge bit deep between her fingers. Sharp. Precise. A cut so clean it took a full second to feel. She didn't look down. She didn't move. She kept her eyes on the Dowager, kept her face smooth and pleasant, the way she'd been trained since childhood. But beneath her glove, something warm and wet began to spread. When she finally dared to glance sideways, Ashby was gone. The champagne table stretched empty beside her. Even his glass had vanished. She stood alone with the locket cutting into her palm and her mother's pearls growing heavier with every breath. 17 years of training. 17 years of learning exactly how to smile, how to curtsy, how to make herself small enough to fit inside society's rules. And in 7 minutes, one man with a crooked collar had shattered all of it. The Dowager began to move through the crowd. Slowly. Deliberately. Each tap of her cane a countdown. Margaret didn't run. She couldn't. Running would admit guilt. So she stood very still, blood seeping through her glove, and watched her future walk toward her. The locket's edge bit deeper. She didn't open her hand. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hold on. Even when it cuts. Even when you know you'll have to let go eventually. Even when your palm is bleeding and the room is watching and every instinct says asterisk drop it, hide it, pretend this never happened asterisk. Sometimes bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a woman standing very still, holding something precious, refusing to be the first to let go. Friday morning arrived grey and reluctant. 6:12 by the mantel clock, though Margaret had been awake since the first servant stirred the coals. She hadn't slept. Her jaw ached from clenching it all night. She was still wearing her gloves. Not the evening gloves from Almack's. Those lay wadded in the bottom of her wardrobe, one palm stained rust brown. She couldn't look at them. But she'd pulled on fresh ones before the maid entered. Cream kid leather button to the wrist, and somehow hadn't taken them off since. Even in bed. Even now, sitting at her writing desk, watching frost spread across the window like cracked porcelain. Her left hand throbbed. 2 small cuts between her fingers, clean and deep. She'd bandaged them herself at 3 in the morning, working by candlelight so the maid wouldn't see. The linen was already spotted through. The locket sat beneath her pillow. She could feel it from across the room. A weight that wasn't weight. Breakfast was at 8. Her mother was already in the dining room, seated at her usual place, the Morning Post arranged beside her plate like a military formation. Margaret's chair scraped the floor. Her mother didn't look up. Lord Hale's flowers arrived yesterday, her mother said, spreading butter on toast with precise, economical strokes. You haven't thanked him. Margaret stared at the teapot. A single brown drop crawled down the porcelain curve, slow as honey. She watched it travel all the way to the silver tray. Her fingers wouldn't uncurl. I'll write today. See that you do. Her mother sipped her tea. He's a good man, Margaret. Patient. He doesn't have to be patient. No, he didn't. There were prettier girls, wealthier girls, girls whose fathers hadn't gambled half the dowry before Margaret was even born. Lord Hale knew this. Everyone knew this. The teardrop reached the tray. Margaret watched it pool. She didn't eat. Her mother didn't notice. By noon, the frost had melted and the decision had formed. Not a decision, really. More like a tide coming in. Slow at first, then impossible to stop. Margaret sat at her desk with fresh paper and a pen she couldn't make touch the page. Lord Hale's roses stood in a crystal vase by the window. 12 blooms. Cream petals with blush edges. They were already starting to brown at the tips. She set down the pen. Her mother's jewelry box sat open on the vanity. The pearls. 17 years of debutantes. The silk thread at the clasp, worn thin as a promise. Margaret's fingers found the weak spot. Pressed. The thread snapped. It made almost no sound. Just a soft asterisk tick asterisk like a clock winding down. And then pearls were everywhere, bouncing off the mahogany, skittering under the divan, disappearing into the cold half. One rolled against her slipper. She didn't pick it up. She stood very still in the wreckage. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. Not from fear. From something else. Something that felt terrifyingly like relief. She would say the clasp broke. A simple accident. The jeweler on Bond Street could restring them. And the jeweler on Bond Street was located, conveniently, beside a gentleman's club where Ellis Ashby spent most Friday afternoons. A coincidence. That's all. She knelt and began gathering pearls. The walk to Bond Street took 20 minutes. Margaret's maid, Clara, walked 2 steps behind, carrying the velvet pouch of loose pearls. The streets were slick with yesterday's rain. Carriage wheels splashed through puddles. A costermonger at the corner was shouting about apples, his barrow piled with red and green and yellow, the whole street smelling of bruised fruit and horse sweat. Margaret's bandaged hand ached with every step. The jeweler shop was small and narrow, crammed between a bookseller and a milliner's. Bells jingled when she opened the door. Inside smelled of metal polish and old velvet. Mr. Finch, the proprietor, peered at her over spectacles balanced halfway down his nose. Lady Margaret. He set down his tiny screwdriver. An honor. What brings you today? She placed the velvet pouch on the glass counter. My mother's pearls. The clasp broke. Mr. Finch loosened the drawstring. Pearls spilled into his palm, catching the light. He turned one over. Then another. His thumbnail traced the silk thread. Margaret stopped breathing. The clasp didn't break, my lady. His voice was gentle. He held up the severed end. Clean. Precise. This was cut. She should have said something. Feigned surprise. Blamed the maid. Instead she just stood there, watching his thumb smooth over the frayed silk, and said nothing at all. The doorbell jingled. She knew it was him before she turned. Knew it in the way her skin prickled. In the way Clara suddenly became very interested in a display of hatpins. In the way Mr. Finch's eyebrows rose just slightly over his spectacles. Ellis Ashby stood in the doorway, hat in hand. He wasn't looking at the pearls. He was looking at her. Mr. Ashby, Mr. Finch said. Your pocket watch, I presume. Yes. Ashby's voice was steady. His hands were not. But I can wait. No rush. Mr. Finch looked from Ashby to Margaret to the pearls in his palm. Understanding settled across his features like tea-staining linen. He set down the strand carefully. Perhaps you'd like to examine the selection of chains while you wait, my lady. I'll be just a moment. Margaret's legs carried her to the far counter. Glass display cases stretched between her and Ashby. Lockets. Brooches. A silver chatelaine with all its attachments. She stared at them without seeing. Behind her, Mr. Finch's voice murmured about escapements and mainsprings. She heard none of it. Then Ashby was beside her. Not touching. Just there, close enough that she could smell rain on his coat. Margaret. His voice was barely audible. Look at me. She did. The glass case reflected them both, ghostly and overlapped. His face was pale. He looked at her hands, still gloved, then back at her face. You came, he said. She couldn't lie to him. Not now. Not here, surrounded by all these tiny, precious objects designed to hold other objects. Portraits, locks of hair, dried flowers from common hedgerows. The pearls, she whispered. I needed them restrung. He looked down at her hands, at the faint shadow of stain bleeding through her glove, right between the fingers. His thumb traced the air an inch above it. Not touching. Just near. You should have let me go. The words hung in the glass between them. Flat. Unavoidable. She had no answer. She had never had an answer. Not since April, When a man with a crooked collar had stopped in a lane to help her retrieve a scattered parcel of books, and she'd looked at his hands and thought, I would like to know these hands forever. She didn't say that. She said, the locket is under my pillow. His breath caught. Barely. She wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't spent 17 weeks memorizing the shape of his inhalations. I didn't bring it, she continued. I couldn't. She stopped. Swallowed. I don't know what I'm doing, Ellis. His name. She'd said his name. In public. In front of Mr. Finch and Clara and anyone else who walked through that door. Ashby's jaw tightened. He reached past her, picked up a silver chain from a display case, pretended to examine the clasp. Then let me help you decide, he said. Louder now. For the shop. This one. Simple. It won't break. He pressed the chain into her palm. Beneath it, folded small and flat, a slip of paper. Her fingers closed around it. Thank you, Mr. Ashby. Her voice only shook a little. Very practical. He nodded once, turned back to Mr. Finch, settled his bill. The doorbell jingled again. He was gone. Margaret stood very still, the chain warm in her hand, the paper hidden beneath it. Clara was watching. Mr. Finch was watching. The pearl sat on the counter, half restrung, the cut thread still dangling. She unfolded the paper in the carriage home. Thursday. The bookshop. Same time. Thursday. 5 days away. Lord Hale was expected for dinner on Thursday. She folded the paper again. Slipped it inside her glove. The cuts between her fingers pulsed with every heartbeat. Sometimes a cut isn't an accident. Sometimes it's a choice made visible. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't holding on. It's letting go of the lie that you don't know exactly what you're doing. Margaret watched London pass beyond the carriage window. Grey sky. Wet streets. A man selling newspapers on the corner, shouting about the weather. She was meeting Ellis Ashby on Thursday. And for the first time in 17 weeks, her hand didn't hurt at all. Tuesday arrived like a held breath. The storm had been building since noon, clouds piling grey upon grey above the London rooftops. By 11 that night, the first thunder rolled. Margaret heard it from her bedroom, a low growl that rattled the window panes and made the candle flame shiver. She was still dressed. Had been dressed for hours. Blue silk, the colour her mother said brought out her eyes. The sapphire on her finger caught the light each time she moved her hand. Lord Hale had proposed at 7 o'clock. He'd done it properly. On one knee in the yellow drawing room, her mother weeping quietly in the corner, her father trying to look sober and mostly succeeding. The ring was heavy. Cold. A sapphire the size of a robin's egg, surrounded by diamonds, set in gold so bright it seemed to glow. Margaret had said yes. Her mouth had formed the word. Her hand had extended. Her face had arranged itself into the appropriate shape of joy. But somewhere between the drawing room and her bedroom, the word had detached from its meaning and floated away, and now she sat in front of her mirror with a sapphire on her finger and no memory of agreeing to anything at all. Thunder cracked again. Closer this time. She should sleep. The opera was tomorrow. She would have to sit in the Hale family box, smile at Lord Hale, let the Tun see her ring and draw its conclusions. She would become, officially and publicly, a nearly married woman. Nearly. That was the word that kept catching. Almost. Not yet. Still time to. To what? The sapphire winked at her. Cruel and beautiful. Wednesday evening. The Royal Opera House. Margaret had been here dozens of times. She knew the weight of the velvet curtains, the specific temperature of the air, always too warm near the chandeliers, always draughty near the doors. She knew which boxes had the best sightlines and which were merely for being seen. She knew that the third act of every opera was when people actually listened, and the first 2 acts were for gossip. Tonight, she couldn't hear a single note. The Hale box was stage right, excellent position. Lord Hale sat beside her, his profile strong and patient. Every few minutes he glanced at her and smiled. She smiled back. Her face remembered how, even if the rest of her had forgotten. Her eyes were not on the stage. 3 boxes to the left. Second tier. She'd known he would be there. Known at the moment her mother read the guest list aloud. And still, when she'd seen him take his seat, collar crooked, left side higher than right, her chest had squeezed so tight she couldn't breathe. He hadn't looked at her. Not once. She watched the back of his head instead. Watched the way his ear reddened during the soprano's aria. Watched his fingers grip the edge of his seat during the crescendo. Watched his shoulders soften when the music finally released its tension. She knew his body. She knew the map of his gestures, the geography of his habits. She knew he parted his hair on the left. She knew he rubbed his signet ring when he was thinking. She knew he tilted his chin up during high notes, like he was reaching for something just out of grasp. She had spent 17 weeks collecting these details, hoarding them like pressed flowers. She had never asked what he feared. The soprano hit her final note. The audience erupted. Margaret clapped along, palms meeting in automatic rhythm, her gaze still fixed on the back of Ellis Ashby's head. He didn't turn around. Midnight. The storm had returned. Margaret dismissed her maid with a headache, waited for footsteps to fade, then rose from her bed. She didn't light another candle. The darkness was kinder. Her shift was thin. The air was cold. She stood before the cheval glass in the corner of her room, and the woman who looked back at her was almost a stranger. The locket hung between her collarbones. She hadn't taken it off since Bond Street. It rested against her skin like a second pulse. She raised her left hand to the glass. The sapphire caught what little light filtered through the curtains. Blue. The same blue as cornflowers. The same blue as the dried petal inside the locket. Same color. Different meaning. She traced her reflection's face. High cheekbones. Mother's nose. Father's chin. A mouth trained to smile at appropriate intervals. Who was this woman? This woman who cut her own mother's pearls to manufacture a reason. Who told herself she was mending while she was really breaking. Who called destruction asterisk fate asterisk and cowardice asterisk circumstance dot asterisk. This woman who had promised herself to one man while wearing another man's locket. The reflection didn't answer. It just stared back, patient and unforgiving. Thunder rolled. Closer now. The window trembled. Margaret's fingers found the locket's clasp. She could open it. She could look at the cornflower again, that faded blue promise from her April lane. She could pretend that was enough. She didn't open it. Because here was the truth, and here was the mirror, and here was the storm finally saying what she'd refused to say. She wasn't romantic. She was terrified. Terrified of the life stretching before her, safe, correct, empty. Terrified of the life she glimpsed in stolen moments, uncertain, scandalous, alive. Terrified that she didn't know which one she truly wanted. Terrified that she did. The rain started. Fat drops against the glass, then more, then a flood. She heard the gate before she saw it. Iron hinges, poorly oiled. The garden entrance. The one she told him about, weeks ago, never imagining he'd remember. He was there. Through the rain-streaked window, a shape in the darkness. No carriage. No umbrella. Just a man in a wet coat, standing at the gate, waiting. She should go down. She should send him away. She should. Her legs were already moving. The garden was drowning. Margaret's slippers soaked through instantly. Rain plastered her shift to her skin. She didn't care. She ran down the path, past the dormant rose bushes, past the fountain she'd played in as a child, past everything she was supposed to protect and preserve. He saw her coming. His face shifted through something she couldn't name. She stopped at the gate. Iron bars between them. Rain streaming down both their faces. "You're soaked," she said. Stupid. The most useless observation in human history. "So are you." His voice was hoarse. His knuckles were white on the gate. "You can't be here." "I know." "If someone sees." "I know." Silence. Just rain, hammering the gravel, the leaves, the roof. Her blood was roaring in her ears. His hand moved. Through the bars, his fingers found hers. Cold. Shaking. Real. "Then tell me to leave, Margaret." The words hung in the wet air, heavy as the storm. She opened her mouth. His fingers tightened on hers. His eyes, she had never seen his eyes like this, desperate and resigned all at once, like a man who already knew the verdict but needed to hear the judge pronounce it. Leave, she should say. Go. This is madness. I am betrothed. You are destroying me. Leave, and let me destroy myself in peace. The rain kept falling. His hand kept holding. Her mouth kept forming words that wouldn't come out. And then Margaret realized. She had been waiting all along for him to disobey her, to refuse to leave, to make the choice for her, so she wouldn't have to make it herself. She had told herself he would fight for her, that he would storm gates and scale walls and refuse to accept any future that didn't include her, that his love would be so fierce, so undeniable, it would sweep away all obstacles. But he was standing at the gate, asking for her command, waiting for her permission. And the terrible, shattering truth was this. He was not going to save her. He was not going to decide for her. He was giving her the one thing she had never truly had, the freedom to choose, and she hated him for it. Because choosing meant responsibility. Choosing meant she couldn't blame fate or circumstance or the weight of 17 years of pearls and promises. Choosing meant this was hers. All of it. The joy and the ruin and the terrifying, glorious uncertainty. The rain slowed. His hand remained. And for the first time in her life, Margaret Standish looked at the gate and saw it for what it really was. Not a barrier. A hinge. Sometimes we wait so long for someone else to open the door that we forget we have hands. We stand in the rain, shivering, hoping for rescue, when the only person who can decide our fate is already wearing our face in the mirror. The bravest words are not "I love you." The bravest words are "I choose." 14 days since the storm. 14 days since she stood at the garden gate in her wet shift and watched Ellis Ashby walk away without an answer. Summer had arrived while Margaret wasn't paying attention. The plane trees along Piccadilly were heavy with leaves now. Pollen drifted across the Serpentine in golden clouds, settling on the water like dust on a mirror. The season was winding down. One final garden party, then everyone would flee London for cooler shores, and whatever hadn't happened by then would never happen at all. Margaret sat at her mother's writing desk. The sapphire was in her jewellery box, replaced by her grandmother's simple gold band. She'd told Lord Hale she needed time to adjust to the weight of the betrothal ring. He'd understood. He was patient. He was always patient. The letter in front of her had 7 drafts beneath it, each one crumpled and discarded. She picked up her pen, set it down, picked it up again. Her hand no longer hurt. The cuts between her fingers had healed to thin white lines, visible only when she spread her palm flat. She did that now. Traced the scars with her thumbnail. Scars, not wounds. The difference was time, and choice, and what you decided to carry forward. She dipped the pen. Dear Dowager Viscountess Hale, I would be honoured if you would take tea with me on Tuesday afternoon. There is a matter of some delicacy I wish to discuss regarding Lord Hale's future prospects and my own family circumstances. I trust your discretion absolutely. Yours in sincere respect. Margaret Standish. She sealed the letter before she could change her mind. Tuesday arrived hot and still. The kind of afternoon that made bees drunk and roses droop. Margaret wore her simplest dress. No jewellery except her grandmother's band. Her mother had asked why she wasn't wearing the sapphire. Margaret said she was saving it for something special. The Dowager arrived at 4 o'clock precisely. Margaret watched her descend from the carriage. Same mahogany cane. Same silver swan handle. Same posture that could make a room fall silent without a single word. But today, the Dowager's shoulders seemed less rigid. Her grip on the cane was tight, though. Always tight. They sat in the yellow drawing room. Tea was poured. Sandwiches arranged. The Dowager waited. Margaret set down her cup. "My lady," she said, "I wish to speak plainly." The Dowager's eyebrows rose a 1/4 inch. That would be a refreshing change. Margaret's pulse hammered in her throat. But her voice remained steady. She had practiced this. 7 drafts, 3 sleepless nights, and a lifetime of watching her mother navigate conversations that weren't conversations at all. "My father's debts," she said, "are greater than Lord Hale has been led to believe." The dowager's teacup paused halfway to her lips. "Not by deception," Margaret continued. "My father is optimistic. He believes investments will recover. But the truth is, my dowry is largely promised elsewhere. What remains would not sustain the lifestyle Lord Hale deserves." She watched the dowager's face, watched the tiny adjustments, mouth tightening, eyes narrowing, fingers gripping the cup's delicate handle. This was the first layer. True, but incomplete. A foundation. "I also worry," Margaret said, "about my mother's health. The physicians say it is her nerves. She requires quiet, stability, a country home with dry air. But she will not leave London while I am unmarried." She paused. "She will not leave me at all." Another truth. Her mother's hands did shake now. Her mother did weep at small things. Whether this was illness or simply age and worry, Margaret could no longer tell. The dowager set down her cup. Her face revealed nothing. But her thumb was rubbing slow circles on the silver swan. "Are you telling me," the dowager said carefully, "that my son has offered for a woman whose family brings debt and decline?" Margaret's stomach clenched. This was the moment. The hinge. "I am telling you," she said, "that Lord Hale deserves full knowledge before he makes me his wife. I will not have him discover these things later and feel deceived." She met the dowager's eyes. "I would rather lose his offer now than his trust after." Silence stretched between them. The clock on the mantel ticked. Bees bumped against the window glass. The dowager picked up her cup, took a slow sip, set it down. "Your mother," she said, "always oversweeten her tea." Margaret blinked. Yes. She does. I never liked it." The dowager's voice was distant. "But I never told her. One doesn't." A pause. "Perhaps one should." She looked at Margaret differently now. Not warmer, exactly. But something had shifted behind her eyes. A calculation reconsidered. "You are not what I expected," the dowager said. Margaret said nothing. She had learned when to hold silence. "George is my only son." The dowager's voice dropped. "His father died young. I have spent 30 years ensuring nothing harms him. Nothing." Her grip on the swan tightened. "That includes wives who bring complication." "I understand." "Do you?" The dowager leaned forward. "You are telling me you are a complication, Lady Margaret. You are placing that knowledge in my hands and asking me to decide if you are also a solution." Margaret's mouth was dry. "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the warm, still air. Margaret could lie, could soften, could retreat into the language of duty and humility that had protected her for 22 years. She didn't. "Because I am tired," she said, "of being chosen by people who don't truly know me. And I am tired of choosing silence to make myself easier to love." Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. Somewhere in the past 14 days, she had become someone who could say such things aloud. The dowager was very still. Her thumb had stopped moving on the swan. "You love someone else," she said. Not a question. Margaret's heart stopped, then started again, harder. "I love myself enough," she said carefully, "to want a marriage built on truth, whether it is to your son or to no one at all." The dowager studied her for a long, long moment. Then she did something Margaret had never seen. She smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but with something that looked almost like respect. "You are more interesting than I anticipated," she said. "I will consider whether that is a good thing." She rose. Her cane tapped the floor once, twice. At the door, she paused. "Tuesday next," she said without turning. "My townhouse. 4 o'clock. We will discuss this further." The door closed behind her. Margaret sat alone in the yellow drawing room, her tea cold, her hand steady, her heart a war drum in her chest. She had done it. She had planted doubt. She had not saved her betrothal. She had likely destroyed it. Lord Hale would hear his mother's concerns. He would investigate. He would find the debts, the diminished dowry, the fragile mother. Not insurmountable obstacles, but cracks in the polished surface. And cracks, once seen, could not be unseen. Her betrothal would collapse within the week. She should feel terrified. She should feel bereft. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Light. Day 16. Lady Jersey's soiree. The Grosvenor Square mansion blazed with candles. Every chandelier, every sconce, every available surface dripping with light and flowers and the glitter of London's finest. The season's last great party before the garden party, and everyone who mattered was here. Margaret wore grey. Not mourning, not quite, but not the bright colours of an unmarried woman hunting for a match. Her throat was bare. Her grandmother's band was the only ring on her finger. She moved through the crowd like water finding its own level. Smiling, nodding, not stopping. She found him in the library. Not an alcove. Not the shadows. The library, with its doors wide open and lamps burning and at least a dozen people scattered among the shelves. He was pretending to read a book. He'd been holding the same page for 10 minutes. She walked straight up to him. Mr. Ashby. He looked up. His face shifted through surprise, hope, fear, so fast she almost missed it. Lady Margaret. I've unsettled the Hale betrothal. Her voice was quiet but steady. It will collapse within the week. His hand tightened on the book. The cost. I know the cost. She reached up, unfastened the chain at her neck. The locket had rested against her skin for 16 days, warming to her temperature, becoming almost part of her. Now she held it out to him. His fingers closed around it. Silver against his palm. Cornflower blue hidden inside. But I will not, she said, be a woman who cuts her own pearls and calls it fate. I will cut the line clean. He stared at the locket. At her. At his own hand, trembling slightly around the small silver oval. Margaret. Her name. Just her name. Spoken like a prayer. Then we are truly ruined, he said. She smiled. The door opened. Margaret turned. Lady Jersey's butler stood in the frame. Elderly. Impeccable. His gaze moved from Ashby's hand, still closed around the locket, to Margaret's bare throat. To her face. To the book in Ashby's grip, held so tightly the spine creaked. His expression did not change. The Countess requests your presence, my lady. A pause. Barely a heartbeat. Immediately. Margaret's blood tasted of salt and iron. Her heart was a bird in a cage, beating itself against the bars. She moved toward the door. Behind her, she heard Ashby set down the book. Heard his breath catch. Heard the tiny click of the locket's clasp as his thumb traced it, again and again. She didn't look back. The butler held the door. His face revealed nothing. But as she passed, his eyes met hers for the briefest instant, and he gave her the smallest of nods. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is tell the truth. Not because the truth hurts, it does, but that's not the danger. The danger is that once you start telling it, you can't stop. It becomes a hunger, a need. You look at all the lies you've wrapped around yourself like winter blankets and you think, I don't need these anymore. I need ... Margaret Standish walked toward Lady Jersey's drawing room. Her throat was bare. Her hands were empty. Her heart was not. Whatever waited behind that door, she would face it. Because she had finally learned the difference between ruin and freedom. And she chose. Day 19. The morning of the final garden party. Margaret woke to the sound of bees. They were thick in the ivy outside her window, drunk on the last of the season's flowers. Summer was bending toward autumn. You could feel it in the way the lights slanted differently, longer and goldener. In the way the peonies along the garden wall had begun to droop, their petals browning at the edges. She lay still for a moment, watching dust motes float through the sunbeams. Her throat was bare. Her finger wore only her grandmother's gold band. The sapphire sat in its velvet box at the back of her jewellery drawer, waiting for its return to Lord Hale. That had happened quietly. Quietly, the way most endings happen. The Dowager had kept her word. She'd met with Margaret again on Tuesday, and again on Thursday. Each conversation was precise, almost surgical, the Dowager probing, Margaret answering. No dramatics. No tears. Just two women examining a betrothal from all angles and finding, together, that the foundation was not as solid as they'd believed. Lord Hale had called on Friday. He'd been kind. He was always kind. He said he understood. He said he hoped they would remain friends. He said the sapphire suited someone else. He was sure of it, someone who would wear it with joy. Margaret had thanked him. Meant it, too. Her mother had wept. Her father had stared at the wall for an hour and then gone to his club. The servants moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. No one knew what to say. Scandal did not erupt. It never does, not in the ways you expect. There was no public confrontation, no dramatic expulsion from Almack's. Just whispers that spread like cracks in ice. The Hale betrothal had faltered. Lady Margaret's prospects were uncertain. Best not to mention it at dinner. By the morning of the garden party, the whispers had moved on to fresher gossip. Someone else's daughter. Someone else's scandal. Margaret was, for the first time in her life, nearly invisible. The garden party began at 3. Margaret arrived with her mother, who had not spoken to her since Friday. They rode in silence, the carriage wheels crunching over gravel, the air thick with the smell of crushed grass and horses and approaching rain. The sky was that particular shade of grey that could go either way, clear up or pour down. The Standish family had attended this party for 43 years. Margaret's mother had attended as a girl, then as a bride, then as a widow raising 2 daughters alone. She knew every hedgerow, every rose variety, every servant's name. She knew which bench had the best sun and which corner offered refuge from unwanted conversation. Today she walked past all of it without looking. Margaret followed 2 steps behind. Her dress was dove grey. Not quite mourning, but close enough to make people glance, then glance away. Her gloves were fresh, unstained. Her mother's pearls were in Mr. Finch's shop, waiting for new thread. She hadn't replaced them. Hadn't worn any necklace at all. Her collarbones felt naked and light, like she'd forgotten something essential and couldn't remember what. The lawn stretched before her, green and geometric. Ladies in pastels strolled among the flower beds. Gentlemen gathered near the punch table, discussing politics and horses. Children chased each other around the fountain, their laughter sharp and bright. Margaret walked the perimeter. She wasn't avoiding anyone. She simply found the edges more comfortable than the center. From the edge, you could see everything. From the edge, no one stood behind you. The hedgerow at the garden's far end was older than anyone remembered. Hawthorn and blackthorn woven together, so dense no rabbit could squeeze through. In spring, it was white with blossoms. In summer, green. In autumn, red with haws. In April, it had produced a single cornflower. She'd been walking home from the bookseller's, arms full of volumes, when her foot caught on an exposed root. The books went everywhere. Pages splayed on gravel. Her bonnet slipped over one eye. She was scrambling, humiliated, when a voice said, "Here, let me help." She'd looked up at a man with a crooked collar and hands that moved gently, carefully, gathering her scattered books like they were made of glass. He'd handed her the last one, a collection of poetry. She still remembered the cover, and said, "I hope you weren't reading this for entertainment. The rhymes are terrible." She'd laughed. Actually laughed, right there on the public lane. The cornflower had been growing at the base of the hedgerow, improbably blue among all that green. He'd noticed it before she did. Plucked it. Held it out. "For your troubles," he'd said. "Better poetry than anything in those books." She'd taken it. Pressed it between the pages of the terrible poetry collection. Given it back to him, weeks later, not knowing what else to do with a gift that felt too large to keep. He'd kept it. All this time. Margaret pressed her palm to the hedgerow leaves. They were dusty from summer, rough against her glove. No cornflowers now. Just green, and seed heads, and stems bending in the afternoon heat. The party continued behind her. Laughter, clinking glasses, someone playing a harp on the terrace. She should go back. Her mother was probably looking for her. Or perhaps not. Perhaps her mother had finally stopped looking, stopped hoping, stopped trying to arrange Margaret's life into something respectable. The thought should have hurt. Instead it just felt quiet. A sound on gravel. She didn't turn. She knew the weight of his footsteps, the particular rhythm of his approach. 17 weeks of memorization, and now her body recognized him before her mind caught up. He stopped beside her. Not touching. Just near. The hedgerow stretched between them and the lane. He was on the other side. She could see his hands gripping the top of the thorny tangle, not quite pushing through. He wasn't wearing gloves. His signet ring caught the light. She looked at his hands. At the scratch across the crest. At his bare fingers, curled around hawthorn branches. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't think you'd want me to." She considered this. I didn't know what I wanted. That was the problem. And now. She watched a bee crawl into a dying peony. Watched it emerge covered in gold pollen. Watched it fly away, heavy and satisfied. Now I know that wanting isn't the same as choosing. And choosing isn't the same as getting. She paused. But I'd rather choose and lose than never choose at all. He didn't respond. She watched his thumb trace slow circles on the signet ring. Thinking. Waiting. Then his hand moved. He reached across the hedgerow. Through the gap where the hawthorn grew thinner, where the blackthorn hadn't yet woven its defense. His palm opened toward her. Not the locket. A single cornflower seed head. Dry and brown and fragile, its tiny seeds packed tight, waiting for release. He must have found it among the dying stems. Must have searched until he found one that hadn't yet scattered. He placed it in her palm. Closed her fingers over it. His hand was warm. Calloused at the fingertips from years of turning pages. Steady now, no trembling at all. Next season, then, he said. 4 words. No promises. No declarations. Just an acknowledgement that seasons end, and seasons begin again, and spring always follows winter if you wait long enough. Margaret opened her palm. The seed head rested in the center, fragile and full. She tilted her hand slightly. A breath of wind caught the tiny seeds and carried them, some onto her grey skirt, some onto his side of the hedgerow, some into the air where they swirled and scattered and disappeared into the late afternoon light. She watched them go, felt the weight of his gaze on her face. Then she looked at his empty palm, at the scars on his fingers she hadn't noticed before, at the way his collar sat slightly crooked, left side higher than right, the same as it had always been. Next season, she said. He nodded once, drew his hand back through the gap. His fingers lingered a moment on the thorns. Behind them, the harpist began a new melody. Someone laughed. A child shrieked with joy near the fountain. Margaret stood at the edge of the garden, her palm now empty, her throat bare, her future unwritten. She didn't look back. The carriage ride home was quiet. Her mother sat across from her, hands folded in her lap, face turned toward the window. The grey sky had not broken. The rain was still waiting. Margaret watched London pass beyond the glass. Streets she'd known since childhood. Corners where she'd walked, shops she'd visited, lanes she'd never forget. Her palm rested on her knee, still open. She thought about seeds. How they needed winter to germinate. How they needed cold and darkness and patience. How they couldn't be rushed, no matter how desperately you wanted spring. She thought about a man with a crooked collar, waiting on the other side of a hedgerow. She thought about next season. The carriage turned onto her street. Her mother's house waited at the end, familiar and unchanged. Everything was the same. Everything was different. Margaret closed her hand. Here's what we don't talk about enough. Endings aren't always loud. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they don't feel like endings at all, just pauses between one season and the next. We spend so much time waiting for the dramatic moment. The door slammed. The ring returned. The grand declaration on a rain-soaked garden path. We forget that most of life happens in the spaces between those moments, in the silences, in the patient waiting for seeds to grow. Margaret Standish didn't get her fairy tale. She didn't ride off into the sunset or escape to Scotland, or live happily ever after in the way the novels describe. She got a seed head in her palm and a promise that had no guarantee. And she chose to believe it was enough. Because sometimes love isn't about possession. Sometimes it's about planting something you may never see bloom. Sometimes it's about opening your hand and trusting the wind to carry the seeds where they need to go. Spring always comes. Not always when you want it. Not always in the form you expect. But it comes. And until then, you wait. You wait with your hands open. Your throat bare. Your heart beating steady in your chest. You wait on your side of the hedgerow, knowing someone waits on theirs. And you trust that next season, the cornflowers will grow again. They always do.